I want to welcome everyone here today. Without objection, the chair may declare a recess at any time. I now recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Welcome to today's hearing of the United States Postal Service. I want to thank you, Postmaster General DeJoy, for appearing before the committee today. And I also want to thank Post Service Inspector General Tammy Hull for being here as well. It has been 3.5 years since Postmaster General DeJoy issued the Delivering America Plan, and 2.5 years since the Postal Service Reform Act was signed into law. This law may have eased the way for the Postal Service to reform its business model, but it left the details to Mr. DeJoy. Mr. DeJoy has withstood terrible character attacks by Democrats, to include demanding he be tried for treason. I give Mr. DeJoy credit for delivering a plan to fix the Postal Service. Time and space have been provided for him to carry out this work. The difficulty of this task has never been underestimated, as it involves completely transforming the U.S. Postal Service into a modern enterprise. This transformation requires competing with some of the most innovative companies on the planet while fulfilling the universal service obligation to deliver the mail, which is a financial challenge. And Mr. DeJoy started with an organization that had been allowed to fall into disrepair. And I don't think I need to remind anyone in the committee about the disrepair the Postal Service was in prior to Mr. DeJoy's appointment as Postmaster General, because this committee has legislative jurisdiction over the Postal Service, and we had many hearings where former Chairman Elijah Cummings and then subcommittee ranking member Mark Meadows joined together in publicly criticizing Mr. DeJoy's predecessor for never even coming up with a plan to reform the post office. However, the Postal Service's financial solvency today continues to be a major concern. The Postal Service is hemorrhaging red ink. This year's loss was almost $10 billion. Next year's loss is projected to be $6.5 billion. And with each loss comes an explanation of how much it was, how much of it was out of your control. Inflation caused by President Biden's out-of-control government spending is one factor, but it's not the only factor. When you predicted the Postal Service could break even, did you not foresee some of these other issues? This includes the civil service retirement obligations, which may be as much as $14 billion. In Mr. DeJoy's testimony, you stated, sir, how you often have been burdened with excessive oversight, to include letters from Congress. Believe me, nobody is more aware than I am of the concerns and frustration about the Postal Service from members of Congress than me. I can't walk down the hall without one of the 434 colleagues of mine giving me a Postal Service horror story. But it comes with the territory. And while this committee is charged with oversight of the Postal Service at an operational level, we are all members representing our constituents. And the people of Western Kentucky have not been immune to problems that seem to stem from efforts to change postal operation. For example, in Treason County, Kentucky, the Postal Service was delivering bills after they were due. And after being told the county of Crittenden was the problem, it turned out the problem lay with the Postal Service. And as the postal network changes, large amounts of mail from Western Kentucky sat in Louisville before finally being sent to Nashville to be sorted. When problems like this occur, members are going to continue to reach out to the Postal Service, just as I did. There are positive signs, such as increased revenue and reduced work hours, but we're eager to hear where all this is going. And there are things that Mr. DeJoy is trying to do in-house that would be better left to the private sector. The Postal Service has added over 100,000 career employees, but personnel costs and retirement expenses are huge liabilities. This isn't going to work unless we look for ways to do more with fewer people. That's what the theme of this last election, and I think the theme of this new administration is going to be how to make government more efficient. We must also address election mail and ballot delivery. We appreciate the effort of Mr. DeJoy and your employees in delivering election mail and ballots during this year's election cycle, as you have done in every cycle since you've been Postmaster General. But the job to get mail and packages from point A to point B, and it's not to serve as de facto election authority. And while the Postal Service gains revenue delivering election mail, it also creates an immense burden, not just in terms of resources, but also reputational risk. This committee and then the House recently passed legislation requiring barcoding on ballots. That was sponsored by Ms. Porter from California, our Democrat colleague. This bill will add much needed but not complete transparency to ballots as they travel through a portion of the postal network. But when extraordinary measures kick in, there's a gaping hole as ballots are no longer scanned regardless of whether they have a barcode. And in California, for example, ballots can be accepted long past Election Day as long as they're postmarked. It leaves postal employees in the position of applying this postmark. To me, there's too much room for bad behavior in that scenario, or the accusation of bad behavior. This issue must be closely examined moving forward, particularly in considering the patchwork quilt of election laws across the thousands of election authorities. Some of these election laws impose absurd expectations on the Postal Service. For example, allowing voters to request a ballot that comes from a printer across the country the day before the election. That's just not feasible. In closing, we know the Postal Service has a job to do, but so do we in Congress. We need you, Mr. DeJoy, to answer our questions and give us reason to believe things will turn around at the Postal Service, which is something that I think this committee hopes for in a bipartisan manner. With that, I now yield to the ranking member for his opening statement.